Okay, I'm just checking where I can. I need to share the new window. Give me a second. Here it is, esports and technical difficulties. Okay, but you should see me now. No? Now, okay. As we saw in the previous presentation, esports is growing significantly in terms of viewership, prize money, and even, social influence, social impact. But with this excitement and fame also comes a burden to the players because they often face long training hours, performance pressure from the organization, fans, and social media. And more and more professional teams are accounting for this issue and are hiring sport or clinical psychology practitioners, showing a clear need for their support. Even in 2022, Garcia Lanzo and colleagues argue that sport psychologists should be an integral part of any esport teams. Now imagine you are a psychologist stepping into this world or considering this idea. The game is digital, the culture is new, and the challenges don't quite look like those in traditional sports. At the same time, the opportunities to shape performance, well-being, or even the future of the progression are promising. Despite this excitement, barriers remain. Esports is novel, its place within sports psychology is unclear, evidence-based knowledge is limited, and many practitioners might already feel anchored in their traditional roles in a clinical or in a sport context. And that's why it's so important to better understand the experiences of sport psychology practitioners who are currently working in esports and ultimately use this knowledge to inform research and practice so we can move forward in this area and also help those who might struggle with making an informed decision of whether they want to enter or not. So today's presentation, as argued, will focus on providing insights into the challenges as well as the opportunities experienced by practitioners delivering psychology support in professional esports. We recruited 7 qualified psychology practitioners that were accredited by official bodies such as APA or the British Psychology Society. And the current data set, research is still ongoing, involved 3 female and 4 male participants. They were aged 38 years old with a range from 30 to 64 years. As you can see on the right, they were distributed across the following continents, and they all were active in professional esports, covering esport titles such as League of Legends, Valorant, Counter-Strike, Fortnite, or Rocket League as the most prominent. They had average 7 years of experience in esports. They sometimes had previous experience in sports or a clinical context, at least the majority of them, with an average of 12 years, ranging from 1 to 39 years, and 4 out of the 7 participants we recruited so far had also own gaming experience, but on a casual level. Again, we did semi-structured interviews averaging 74 minutes, and the interview guide included questions touching on the research questions. For example, could you discuss your experience working as a practitioner in esports? So very general. And then we specifically asked for challenges they experienced in their role as a practitioner, as well as how this role and working within this role impacted their personal as well as professional growth. This presentation will also include some advice that they would give to their younger self or aspiring sports psychologist, and the sport should be in brackets. And I'd like to highlight that data collection is still ongoing, and that's why the sample size of 7 is quite limited, and the analysis is still ongoing and not finished yet. So data is very fresh. Let's, similar to the last presentation, take a look into the challenges that they reported. Something that was shared across the participants was that they felt like a fireman or a firewoman. This term was used by 3 out of the 7 participants, and they almost all of them used the expression of putting out fires, which meant for them that they have very limited time frames to bring effort to the team on the spot. So they were hired or recruited because there will be a championship, and that's what they need to work on. And it was very difficult for them, based on their experience, to work in the long term because they constantly need to work on solving problems. Additionally, they mentioned challenges such as gaining buy-in, which complicated the previous challenge we just heard about. And here, a 34-year-old male sports psychologist stated that almost or half of the players he worked with were 100% against it at first. So it was quite difficult to first build rapport and, on the other hand, show results on the spot. But he argued that if you keep showing up and stay positive, they can't dislike you in the long run. Furthermore, a female performance coach discussed that in addition to gaining buy-in from the players, there was also the need to build rapport with the organization and the coaches, because you need to fight for time and you need to create the space where you can provide your services. Similar to what we heard from the previous presentation among the coaches, in professional esports, you've got a new coach every month. By the time you upskilled the second coach, they're probably gone, is a quote by Maokai, 33-year-old male psychologist, who stated that there's a frequent turnover, and once you worked with the coach and approved him, he might change, and this also accounted to the players. We heard it from the coaches, and again, the organization might change the roster, and then one player or a coach is being removed, which makes it very hard to think in the long run and make a real impact. Something that was very unfortunate to hear is that 2 out of 3 female practitioners we interviewed also mentioned gender-specific challenges. And here we can see that Nami felt like she needs to do 100% better than a man doing the same thing. This was echoed by Breyer in a similar way, saying that if she asks for a thing, she always needs to give a full argumentations, whereas a male practitioner might get it on the spot. And both psychologists that I mentioned here also mentioned that they experience sexual jokes when they have individual sessions with clients, that players within a team might talk behind their back, especially when they were new to the team. Last but not least, for the challenges, there were some demands on the work-life balance. The practitioners mentioned that the workload is quite high and they need to put in long working hours, which causes them to make sacrifices in terms of their free time and as well as their social life. They describe working in esports as very consuming. And one practitioner mentioned that this might even lead to burnout or mental health issues, which is not a stressor itself or a challenge itself, but can be a result out of it. On this slide is an overview of the preliminary data analysis, and what you can see highlighted in red are the things we just described and discussed. And what was not mentioned is highlighted or illustrated in white, such as limited resources or practitioners being isolated. Some mentioned the working conditions, fragmented time zones or fragmented schedules, or even knowledge gaps in terms of the mechanics, the lingo, or the culture that might be different in esports compared to traditional sports. On the other hand, the coaches, I'm sorry, I'm tired, I'm a bit ill, and 2 presentations after one another caused some confusion, I'm sorry. So the opportunities that the practitioners mentioned often surrounded player and personal growth, meaning that they were quite happy to see players developing in different areas of their life, as illustrated by Pike, the 36-year-old male performance coach. He said that this is not limited to esports, and often practitioners did not even mention performance, but similar to what we see in the right quote by Breyer, is that it made them very happy to see them grow as a person and helping them to be more reflective and live a more comfortable life. In addition, less frequently mentioned and less significant was the aspect of creative freedom. As this practitioner described, it allowed him a lot of innovation and creative mind stuff, such as using videos, podcasts, or in-game analysis in ways that sports might not allow. And something that was shared by, I'd say, 4 out of the 7 participants was that they felt like a role model. And here Nami describes, when I started, I didn't have a woman that I could look up to in esports. Now female psychologists come to me and say, I did it because I saw you doing it as a woman. So now I know I could do it, which gave her very much value and very much, she was very proud in terms of that. And this was also echoed by male performance coaches or male psychologists who said that this was also shared by other practitioners or others that are interested in joining esports, that he was something like a pioneer who entered esports quite early in its development. Again, everything we touched on already is highlighted in blue. And in addition to that, we heard about meaningful relationships, traveling to events, that the work is aligned with their passion. They have a diverse collaboration, including working with different roles, nationalities, and cultures. And the practitioners also discussed that they enjoyed the youthful energy. These were their words. That they felt young and that the environment was quite excited because they worked with a lot of young and energetic players. Let's now shift our focus to 3 bits of advices that were shared with the practitioners. And here, one male performance coach is sharing that he argues you need to pick your fights, especially given the short-term focus and the fact that practitioners described as putting out fires. You need to pick your fights and start where you can have an impact and provide the most value in the most effective manner. So starting with small steps that are very significant, and then think about the other things in the long run, such as the cultural system, which you might not change at the beginning. Secondly, the advice was that you just need to be open, and you should expect that people might initially react negative, but it can be a very rewarding work that is extremely diverse in contrast to other fields. The practitioners often mention that you need to get started, maybe do less or do work that is less paid or not paid at all, but provide some benefit and then be successful in the long run, and that you have to feel comfortable with what you're doing. This is similar, but described in different words by Nami, the female clinical psychologist, who said it will be difficult and you need to prove yourself 100 times more than male practitioners, but it will be worth it. It's hard, but it's not impossible. These are the advices. And now we turn our attention to the summary of the findings. This is an image that was represented in my head. They were very happy with their role. They needed to put out fires constantly. This was the most prominent quote or expression among the practitioners, but they loved doing what they do, being aware that they put in a lot of effort to get where they are. To keep it very briefly. In terms of the limitations and future research, we did not differentiate between clinical and sports psychologists. Our data set includes 2 clinical psychologists and the rest were trained or walked the training road as sports psychologists. And we know that those roles have a different training route and they have different competencies, which might influence how they work, but also how they experience the environment and the challenges and the opportunities that they would describe. So future research might want to differentiate, or we would like to recruit more of both roles to see if there's an actual difference. Additionally, different samples will be quite beneficial, such as differences in their gender, their experience, their performance level, whether they provide support at amateur, semi-professional, or professional levels, but also in terms of esports. So it might be different when working in League of Legends or working in Rocket League, because once the environment or the team or the competitive structure changes, their experience and the benefits might also very likely change. This also relates to their work approach. We just touched on the clinical and sport psychologist differentiation, but within those roles, they might have a different approach of working, for example, for the client or working for the organization or seeing themselves as the expert or using different acceptance commitment therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy. And this might also influence the effectiveness of their work and the assessment of what they do. We don't know how effective their report is, so we can assume it is successful and effective because they work at the highest level of performance in esports, and they would not be there if they don't. But future research should dive into that and also use objective measures to see, and intervention studies, what they do and what is the level of effectiveness. Similar, as argued in the previous presentation, we might want to use diary studies, think aloud research, and longitudinal research, as well as bigger samples to gain more insights. In terms of practical implications, it seems very valuable to provide a role awareness among esport teams or among esports of what are the competencies, boundaries, but also working areas of psychologists, because this often created some challenges. We should consider the practitioner well-being, given the challenges, and given that, and even though they argue that this is their passion and that's something that they need to do, we might want to stress peer support, also account for work-life balance, and set clearer roles given the role awareness. As highlighted in the advice, there's short and long-term demands and short and long-term expectations maybe they set on themselves. And it would be beneficial to expect roster changes and a win-now pressure, so putting out fires, but also advocate for long-being, resilience, and team culture in the long run. So while being aware of that, it seems very beneficial to set the expectations for yourself. And if you can, very honestly, to the team and the organization, that you don't want to work in the short term, but want to work in the long term with the teams. But the current structure of esports there seems a bit difficult. Something we heard among the accounts of the practitioners is that support should be holistic and not just focus on performance, but also on life skills and personal growth, and maybe something that slightly covers their boundaries. We should address inclusivity. So sexism is a thing based on 2 out of 3 female practitioners that worked within esports. There's a lack of standards and role ambiguity, which can be solved through, or can be addressed through code of conduct. So this is something where we might want to have open communications about it and set some standards. And innovation and mutual growth is something that allows for transformative space within esports to develop yourself as a practitioner and also be creative in terms of the methods you use. And maybe, at least at a lower level, allow for more mistakes to then get into the higher jobs. To conclude, again, this is a starting point. Challenges and opportunities are worth considering to make a decision whether you or others want to enter esports or not, or whether you want to talk differently with the psychologists currently being active in your team. And future research is needed to provide evidence-based intervention strategies and improve the current service that team provided. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank my team once again, Laura Swettenham and Amy Whitehead from Liverpool Johns Moores University in the UK. And now I'm looking forward to your potential questions. Thank you. Oh.
Thank you very much once again, Oliver. We do have a couple of questions again from Twitch chat. First off, from Bori42. He says, that sounds really tough for the psychologist. What do they do for their mental health to not get burnout? I get the feeling that most of them are at the brink of burnout, if not actually in burnout currently, while they're practicing.
Oh, thank you, Toby. That's a great question, and thanks for listening. Honestly, we did not address that for this study. We had some chats, and of course, I'm interested, and I also work as an applied sport psychology expert. And that's why we briefly talked about it. But given that our research question was just focused on challenges as well as opportunities, I was limited in going into too much detail. So when a coach, when a practitioner himself mentioned, or herself, that the challenges he or she perceives are related to some burnout or mental health issues, I was trying to gain more insights into how that really looks like and not just leave it at that and then move on. What's another challenge? Or what's another opportunity? But when they were done with that, and this was just one who explained it in a little bit more detail, then I moved on because it was not the research aim. And we also slightly touched on the ways the practitioners worked, which was not included in this presentation. And now I need to read the question again. It's very tough. What do they do for the? Yeah, it's similar to what the coaches do. And given the lack of participants at the moment, it's very difficult to say that something that all do, but the one practitioner that mentioned that was physical activity and talking a lot with his family and friends about it. And also someone he grew up with developing as a practitioner. So a lot of exchange, a social dimension, and something like emotional regulation using physical activity. But the sad thing is that it's not about what individuals can do and what practitioners can do. For example, breathing techniques or doing reflective practices and thinking about what factors are associated with that and what can I do about that. But it's more about the change of the environment. And that's what the practitioners felt very limited control about, which is very sad because they are reflected. So all of the practitioners we interviewed were very reflected. And I believe they knew what they need to do. But as we heard from the accounts from the practitioners, it's very hard to change the reason that's causing them the challenges and the stress. Because esports is very volatile and sometimes the organization is not listening. And that is what makes it hard. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A follow-up question to that was, you talk about clinical and sports psychologists, but are there any other psychologist specializations that might be beneficial in esports teams that aren't yet used?
That's a fantastic question. I believe I will include it in the final manuscript in the discussion, in the practical implication session. And we slightly did so already in the draft. It's not that you need one or the other. And Swettenham and colleagues wrote a book chapter on sport psychology support in esports and provide a definition of what sport psychology support is and how sport psychology practitioners work, and also differentiate different roles and set forth a guide on how to choose the right practitioner for your needs. So first of all, teams and organizations or individual players might want to consider what they actually need. And this will influence whether it's a clinical or sports psychologist. Not saying that one clinical psychologist can't work within the realms of sports psychology if they have some training and experience. But first, I would question what are the needs, and then what is the best option given my resources, like finances, to solve this need. And this is the big issue. and other roles, we have a lot of different roles. So in professional teams that I highly value, they have a nutritionist, they have a performance coach who is, for example, a sports psychologist, but it seems also very valuable to have the contacts. Maybe they are not hired or employed by the organization, but once a problem like a clinical issue or symptom is occurring, then this might, in the terms of sports psychologists, might exceed their competencies, and then you want to get in touch with someone who you can reach out to, who can work on this issue. It's a very broad answer.
Absolutely, yeah. That's great. Thank you very much. And then from Mauno Poika, they say, were there any differences in the experiences of performance coaches depending on whether they had a background or degree in psychology versus some other field? Or did you include psychologists alone? And they say, this may have skipped my attention. I guess that's a question across both of your talks there.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. We thought to solely recruit practitioners who work at the highest level of esports, so professional esports, and those who are qualified, to be sure that the sample is knowing what they do, and not someone who claims to be a sports psychologist or clinical psychologist. And that was like the eligibility criteria for recruiting them. So our data set only includes qualified and accredited sports psychologists or clinical psychologists, noting that they sometimes use different titles to describe their role, such as mental coach or performance coach.
Okay. I suppose that opens up a whole other conversation about the morality and ethics of people who are taking that role without the qualifications or backgrounds. But that's a separate talk entirely. So, yeah, there was another one which was a follow-up to one of Bori 42 questions. X-Zayten said, I'm really interested in the research domain of esports and doing performance coaching. Is the research domain coherent? Because we are mainly talking about sports psychologists, but clinical psychology seems to be new within the realm.
Sorry, I was distracted. Can you rephrase the question?
Someone said, I'm really interested in the research domain of esports and doing performance coaching within that. But they said, is the domain coherent across all of the research that exists? Adding on, we are mainly talking about sports psychology here, and clinical psychologist role seems to be new in esports.
Yeah. Maybe it's my...
It's also my future neuropsychologist, sorry.
Okay. First of all, thank you for this great question. Maybe it's my English skills, but I'm not entirely sure what you mean by coherence. So the research on sports psychology support in esports is...
and sort of approaching the same topics.
There are areas of research that benefited from more researchers investigating it, such as stress and coping and physical activity interventions. But there are also areas such as applied psychology support that received little attention. And we also worked on a systematic review trying to gather the intervention studies that have been performed within esports from a sports psychology or psychology standpoint, and a commentary of all existing research using, or from applied psychology perspective, but those are quite limited and often also limited in terms of their research design, given that they are, for example, case studies with one participant or one practitioner. So I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but it's just a starting point, and we need to add on that. And without those starting points, such as our study, we wouldn't benefit from the more detailed and longitudinal research that we might want and we might need. So to answer your first question, it's not very coherent in my perception. But feel free to contact me and send me an email or state your question again.
Absolutely. Just to end off on one final question, Cameron Vanloo asked me to ask, not specifically related to the points made in your talks, but with the impact that clinical psychology and performance coaching has upon esports and the wider organizations, do you think there's a way that we can sort of stimulate more interest in this topic as a research implication? Because there's not enough people, it feels like, actually looking at these things, which you kind of alluded to there.
Yeah, I can just say yes from my heart. I think once we understand what good work means and good service, and this might include aspects like how do players actually perceive the support, how effective is it on an objective and subjective level, how do those that work in esports actually approach problems, that can help us to provide them with a greater benefit and a more comfortable environment. But I'd say yes, we need more research on that, but there are a lot of different topics that also would benefit from more research in the realm of esports. So I will do the work in the future, and I hope that others might join.
Awesome. Well, the work you're currently doing is very impressive. So thank you very much, Oliver, for your double feature there. Yeah, after that.